Welcome to Moon Mine Temple. In the hush of dawn, when the Ganges mist still clung to the riverbanks and monks stirred slowly in their monasteries, few would have imagined that faraway empires, Persian and Greek, had already left their footprints upon the soil that nurtured the Buddha's wisdom. The story of inner peace, as preserved in early Buddhist thought, is not only an Indian tale. It is a tapestry woven from many threads: the royal highways of the Achaemenid kings, the coins stamped with Alexander's profile, the whispers of Zoroastrian priests, and the reasoned dialogues of philosophers who once walked in marble colonnades. The story begins long before Alexander crossed into India. Centuries earlier, the Persian Empire under Darius I had stretched its wings across the northwest of the subcontinent. Gandhara and the Indus Valley fell under its governance, and with them came a new conception of order: vast imperial roads linking city to city, a system of satraps to administer law, and the hum of diverse tongues exchanging not just trade, but ideas. The Persians brought with them Zoroastrian fire altars, a belief in the cosmic battle between truth and falsehood, and the notion of an ordered universe guided by Asha, the principle of harmony, justice, and truth. In distant monastic gatherings, when Buddhist disciples spoke of the middle way, some echoes of this Persian principle may have already resounded. For what was the middle way but the harmonizing of extremes, the stillness in the center of struggle? In the meeting places of Gandhara, a young monk might have overheard a Persian priest speaking of Asha, and though the language was foreign, the essence of cosmic balance might have stirred something within his heart, complementing the Buddhist teaching of dependent origination. Trade caravans moved along the royal road of Persia and soon along the budding arteries of the Silk Road. With trade came questions: what is justice? What is the soul? What binds men across cultures? Buddhist monks carrying begging bowls often walked alongside merchants and envoys. They became witnesses not only to the shifting powers of kings, but to the mingling of ideas. And then came the Greeks. Alexander, the young king from Macedon, swept across the lands like a tempest. In his wake lay broken cities and also the strange seeds of new civilizations. When his armies reached India in 326 BCE, they brought more than swords. They brought the dialectic of Socrates, the geometry of Euclid, and the notion that reason could probe the essence of life. After Alexander's death, his successors ruled parts of India, and the Greco-Bactrian and Indo-Greek kingdoms flourished for centuries. In Gandhara, Buddhist monks encountered Greek sculptures. Until then, the image of the Buddha had often been represented only by symbols: an empty throne, a Bodhi tree, a footprint upon the earth. But under Greek influence, the serene face of the Buddha began to emerge in stone, with flowing robes carved like Hellenic togas and hair curled like Apollo's. The Greeks gave form to formless wisdom, not altering its essence, but clothing it in a language of beauty that could be recognized across cultures. Yet the Greek influence was not only artistic. Dialogues between Greek philosophers and Buddhist monks may have taken place in quiet courtyards shaded by fig trees. Imagine a Greek thinker trained in the academy's traditions asking a monk, "If all is impermanence, what then is the substance of the self?" And the monk, with eyes lowered, might answer, "There is no unchanging substance, friend. The self is but a river, never the same, never separate from the rains that feed it." In such exchanges, two streams of wisdom converged: the Greek pursuit of essence and the Buddhist insight into emptiness met like rivers flowing into one ocean of human seeking. Meanwhile, Persian influence lingered in subtler ways. The Achaemenid kings had created a vision of governance rooted in tolerance of many faiths and cultures. In the Edicts of Ashoka, the Buddhist emperor who spread the Dharma across Asia, one can almost hear an echo of that tolerance. Ashoka did not demand uniformity. He asked for respect, compassion, and coexistence, a spirit that might have been strengthened by memories of Persian pluralism. Thus, early Buddhist wisdom became a bridge where cultures met. The Buddhist teaching of nonviolence found new urgency in lands ravaged by conquest. His doctrine of impermanence found illustration in the rise and fall of empires. His call to inner peace became more universal when framed against the storms of armies marching from the West. The story, however, is not told in abstractions alone. It lives in the lives of men and women who walk the dusty paths between shrines and marketplaces. Let us follow, then, a young monk named Aniruddha, who lived in a monastery on the edge of Gandhara. His teacher had once been a witness to Alexander's men drinking from the rivers, their bronze armor gleaming like fire under the sun. Aniruddha grew up listening to tales of strange foreigners who spoke of gods dwelling on Mount Olympus and of magi who tended sacred flames. One evening, as the saffron sunset bled across the horizon, Aniruddha met a Greek traveler named Demetrius outside the monastery gates. Demetrius had studied under philosophers in Bactria before journeying east. He carried not only scrolls, but questions. "Monk, your people say there is no permanent soul, no eternal essence. How then can peace be found if nothing abides?" Aniruddha smiled gently. Peace is not in clinging to what abides, but in releasing the clinging itself. When you cease to grasp, the river of life carries you without struggle. This is peace. Demetrius furrowed his brow. But if there is no essence, how does one know truth?
The truth, replied Aniruddha, is seen not in what stands forever, but in seeing clearly what arises and passes away. To know impermanence deeply is to see the very nature of all things. Their dialogue stretched into the night, with oil lamps flickering and crickets singing from the grass. Though they came from distant worlds, they discovered that questions of meaning belonged to all humanity. In the years that followed, Demetrios stayed near the monastery, sketching statues of the Buddha that bore a strange blend of Greek grace and Indian stillness. Aniruddha traveled with merchants into Persian lands, where he heard hymns to Ahura Mazda and spoke with priests who honored truth as the highest principle. He found that the language was different, but the yearning for harmony was the same. Through such lives, the influence of Greek and Persian thought seeped into the soil of Buddhism. It was not conquest alone that carried ideas. It was conversation, art, marriage, trade, and the human thirst for peace. And so, by the time Buddhist monks journeyed further east into Central Asia and China, they carried with them not only the words of the Buddha, but the subtle imprints of Persian justice and Greek reason. When they taught of compassion, they carried the memory of empires that once ruled through tolerance. When they described inner peace, they spoke in a language enriched by encounters with philosophers who had once sought the unchanging. This was the ancient root of inner peace, a wisdom that had learned from struggle, that had opened itself to many voices, and that had found stillness not by denying history, but by embracing the flow of all things.
As Aniruddha wandered along the winding paths of Gandhara, he began to notice subtleties in the world that echoed the lessons he had learned from his Persian and Greek encounters. The markets were alive with languages and currencies from distant lands. yet each transaction carried the same rhythm of cause and effect that he had studied in the Dharma. A merchant selling silk to a trader from Bactria would smile when the bargain was fair and frown when greed prevailed. The young monk saw that the principle of balance, the very essence of inner peace, manifested not only in meditation but in daily life. One day, Aniruddha found himself walking along a riverbank where Persian travelers had set up camp. They had brought with them a small fire altar, a sacred flame that was tended day and night. Curious, he approached and watched as the priest carefully added wood, chanting words in a language foreign yet melodic. Aniruddha asked, "Why tend this flame so diligently?" The priest looked at him kindly. "This fire is eternal, yet it is ever-changing. Its essence is in the care we give, not in the flame itself. It reminds us that the divine is found not in permanence, but in attentive action." Aniruddha bowed, recognizing the reflection of the middle way in those words. Just as the Persian honored the transient flame with devotion, so too did Buddhism teach that mindful presence in each moment could awaken clarity and peace. Weeks passed, and the monastery became a meeting point for Greek scholars traveling eastward. Among them was Callias, a philosopher whose scrolls contained arguments about the nature of happiness, virtue, and reason. He had studied Aristotle and the Stoics, yet he felt that something essential was missing in the pursuit of pure logic. He sought the calm serenity he had heard described in stories of the Buddha. Callias found Aniruddha sitting beneath a Bodhi tree, eyes half closed, lips curved in the quietude of meditation. Hesitant, he asked, "How does one cultivate peace without relying on reason alone?" Aniruddha opened his eyes and gestured to the river. "Observe the river. It moves without effort, yielding to stones and banks alike. It does not fight its path nor cling to what passes. Reason can illuminate, but it is the surrender to impermanence that allows the heart to rest." Callias pondered this as he sketched the river, noticing the reflection of the sky in its surface. He realized that reason and reflection could guide the mind, but wisdom was born in the harmony between observation and acceptance. In this understanding, Greek logic and Buddhist mindfulness found a shared expression. Meanwhile, the Persian influence lingered in the social life of the monastery. Hospitality, respect for strangers, and the administration of justice within the monastic community bore traces of the Achaemenid emphasis on order and fairness. Aniruddha watched as disputes among students were resolved through dialogue rather than punishment, echoing the Persian principle that harmony arises from equitable treatment and recognition of truth. Months turned into years, and the monastery itself became a living laboratory of intercultural wisdom. Young monks practiced meditation while listening to tales of distant empires. They learned Greek arithmetic to manage supplies and Persian methods of governance to organize their community. And slowly, an understanding emerged. Inner peace was not a refuge from the world, but a skill of engaging with it fully, informed by many voices. Aniruddha often reflected on a lesson he had learned from Demetrius. Wisdom, Demetrius had said, is like a tree whose roots draw from many soils. A tree cannot grow from a single grain of earth alone. In that moment, Aniruddha realized that Buddhism itself was enriched by the soils of Greece and Persia. The teachings of the Buddha, although grounded in India, were not isolated. They were porous, ready to absorb insight from every culture it touched. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the mountains were painted in hues of gold and purple, Aniruddha sat with his students by the river. A Greek sculptor had just completed a statue of the Buddha, its draped robes resembling the folds of a toga, yet its expression serene in the unmistakable style of Indian calm. "Master," a young novice asked, Why do foreigners care so much about our teachings? Aniruddha smiled. Because the truths of the heart know no borders. The mind seeks clarity and the heart seeks peace. These are universal longings, whether one is Persian, Greek, or Indian. We are all travelers, crossing inner landscapes as much as outer lands. In the next day, a caravan of merchants arrived from Persia, bringing rare silks, spices, and scrolls. Aniruddha welcomed them, inviting them to rest and share stories of their homeland. They spoke of kings and deserts, of fire rituals, and the eternal struggle of light over darkness. As the monks listened, they noticed that the stories, while foreign, mirrored their own teachings, that attachment breeds suffering, that compassion is the path to harmony, and that understanding the nature of change leads to liberation. In the quiet nights that followed, Aniruddha meditated deeply, reflecting on the convergence of these cultures. Greek reason, Persian ethics, and Indian insight were like rivers merging into the same ocean. The Buddhist teachings were the vessel, and the currents of other civilizations filled it with depth, resilience, and clarity. It was in this synthesis that the ancient roots of inner peace truly flourished. Peace was no longer simply the absence of conflict, it was the recognition of unity in diversity, the ability to hold many truths without being torn by them, the skill of finding the still points within the ever-turning wheel of life.
Aniruddha realized that history itself was a teacher. The rise and fall of empires, the blending of cultures, the movement of people across deserts and rivers, all were lessons in impermanence, compassion, and wisdom. Greek philosophy offered analytical tools, Persian culture offered ethical frameworks, and Buddhist meditation offered direct experience of the mind's calm. Together, they formed a comprehensive approach to life, bridging intellect, morality, and inner stillness. Years passed, and Aniruddha's reputation as a wise teacher spread beyond Gandhara. Travelers, scholars, and even rulers came to learn from him. They marveled at how his teachings wove together strands from distant lands into a tapestry of profound simplicity. They saw that true wisdom was not isolationist but dialogic, growing richer with every encounter. One evening, as the stars reflected upon the river like scattered gems, Aniruddha spoke to his students. "Look upon the heavens," he said. "The stars shine with their own light, yet they form constellations together. So too must we, each bringing our own understanding, our own culture, our own questions, join in the pursuit of truth and peace. The roots of wisdom are ancient, stretching across lands and lifetimes, yet the fruit is always within reach: serenity, clarity, and compassion." And in that quiet moment, the monastery itself seemed to breathe with harmony. The lessons of Greece, Persia, and India coalesced into a living practice, a way of being that transcended borders, languages, and even centuries. Inner peace, Aniruddha knew, was not merely a state to achieve, it was a path to walk, informed by the wisdom of many, yet found within the self.
Seasons changed, and rivers swelled with the monsoon, and the monastery flourished as a center of learning and contemplation. Aniruddha's students had grown not only in knowledge, but in the subtle art of integrating diverse wisdom into their daily lives. The Greek and Persian influences were no longer external curiosities. They had become part of the living fabric of the monastery, subtly shaping how meditation was taught, how ethics were understood, and how harmony was practiced. Aniruddha often reflected on the teachings of the Persian priest he had met years before. The principle of asha, truth, order, and cosmic harmony, resonated deeply with the Buddhist understanding of Dharma. While Buddhism spoke of impermanence and detachment, Persian thought emphasized responsibility within an ordered universe. Aniruddha realized that these ideas were complementary. Inner peace did not exist in isolation from the world, but in conscious engagement with it. One morning, a delegation arrived from a Greek city in Bactria, carrying gifts of scrolls and scientific instruments. Among them was a philosopher named Lysimachus, a student of the Stoic tradition who had heard of Aniruddha's teachings and wished to understand the harmony he seemed to cultivate between thought and action. "Master," Lysimachus asked as they walked along the riverbank, "how does one reconcile the Stoic notion of virtue with your teachings on impermanence? If all is transient, what is the point of cultivating virtue?" Aniruddha paused, letting the morning breeze brush against his face. He said, "Virtue is not merely a rule to follow. It is the natural expression of a mind that sees clearly. Even though everything changes, our actions have consequences. Compassion, honesty, and kindness ripple through the world, and in practicing them, we align ourselves with the flow of existence." Lysimachus considered this, noting the similarity to Stoic ideas about living according to nature and reason. Yet here, in the gentle cadence of the river and the quiet serenity of the monk, he saw a living example of wisdom that was both rational and profoundly human. The Greek philosophers and Persian priests who visited the monastery often engaged in dialogue with the monks, exchanging ideas about ethics, the cosmos, and the nature of happiness. These conversations were not debates to be won, but opportunities to explore the depths of understanding. Through dialogue, Aniruddha and his companions discovered that truth could be approached from multiple angles, each enriching the other. The arts also reflected this fusion of cultures. Greek sculptors continued to carve Buddhist statues with the precision of Hellenic realism, while Persian craftsmen introduced intricate patterns and designs into monastery decorations. Music, too, blended influences. Flutes and stringed instruments from the West harmonized with Indian drums and chants, creating melodies that seemed to embody the unity of diverse wisdom traditions. Aniruddha observed that even the simplest daily routines were enriched by this cultural blending. When monks prepared food, they incorporated techniques learned from Persian travelers. When teaching meditation, they occasionally borrowed metaphors from Greek philosophy, illustrating impermanence with the cycles of seasons or the arc of the stars. These practices made the teachings more accessible and deeply resonant, not only for locals, but for travelers from distant lands. One day, a young monk named Satsika approached Aniruddha with a question that had troubled him for weeks. "Master, I see so many ideas from foreign lands. How can we know which is true? How do we practice inner peace when there are so many voices?" Aniruddha led him to the edge of a cliff overlooking the river valley. Below, the water moved tirelessly, encountering rocks, trees, and bends in the riverbed, yet flowing onward without struggle. He said, "Observe the river. It does not cling to any obstacle, nor reject any current. It moves in harmony with what it encounters. So too must we receive wisdom, not by clinging to one voice or rejecting another, but by discerning what aligns with truth and compassion within our hearts." Satsika nodded, understanding that inner peace was cultivated not by isolating oneself from the world, but by integrating diverse perspectives with clarity and awareness. The years continued, and Aniruddha's reputation spread far and wide. Envoys from Persia and Greece traveled long distances to witness the harmony cultivated in the monastery. They brought with them manuscripts on philosophy, astronomy, and ethics, which the monks eagerly studied. In turn, the monks shared teachings on meditation, mindfulness, and compassion. Over time, a rich tapestry of knowledge emerged, woven from multiple cultures but rooted firmly in the Buddha's insight into the nature of mind and suffering. In one memorable encounter, a Persian scholar named Ardashir presented a complex problem to Aniruddha. Years flowed like the river that cradled the monastery, carrying with them pilgrims, merchants, and scholars from lands near and far. Aniruddha, now older, watched as his students matured into teachers themselves, each carrying a fragment of the vast wisdom that had been gathered from Persian, Greek, and Indian sources. The monastery had become more than a sanctuary. It was a living testament to the possibility of harmony between cultures and ideas. One day, a young Greek student named Philon approached Aniruddha with a question that reflected the curiosity that had drawn so many travelers eastward. "Master," he said, "I have studied reason, ethics, and the cosmos, yet I struggle to understand how to live peacefully. How do I take this wisdom into the world?" Aniruddha led Philon to the garden, where flowers from Persia, Greece, and India bloomed side by side. "Look at these plants," he said. "Each is different in color, shape, and fragrance, yet they thrive together, nourished by the same sun and soil. Wisdom grows in the same way. Receive what each culture offers, let it enrich your understanding, and act with clarity and compassion. Peace arises not from rejecting the world, but from embracing it with awareness." Philon listened intently, realizing that the lessons of inner peace were not abstract. They were lived, embodied in every act of care, contemplation, and dialogue. He understood that Greek rationality, Persian ethical structures, and Buddhist mindfulness were not competing paths, but complementary streams leading toward the same river of understanding. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind distant mountains, Aniruddha would sit with his students and recount tales of travelers and scholars who had crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers to reach the monastery. Each story was a lesson: the Persian priest who had taught him about the sacred flame, the Greek sculptor who captured serenity in stone, the merchants who carried not only goods but questions about justice, virtue, and happiness. Each encounter had been a seed, which, nurtured by contemplation and practice, had grown into a tree of insight. The monastery's art and architecture continued to reflect this fusion. Statues of the Buddha combined the elegance of Greek form with the meditative serenity of Indian aesthetics, while intricate Persian patterns adorned the walls, reminding all who entered that beauty and wisdom were universal. Music from diverse traditions filled the courtyards, a living hymn to the unity that arises when differences are honored rather than suppressed. One afternoon, Aniruddha led a group of monks in a meditation practice he had developed over decades. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Visualize the river that flows through our valley. See it accepting all obstacles, flowing around stones, nourishing the land, yet remaining undisturbed in its essence. So too must your mind be, aware, compassionate, and unbound by attachment." As the monks settled into silence, Aniruddha reflected on the intertwining paths that had shaped this wisdom. The Persian influence had taught him the value of order, justice, and ethical responsibility. The Greeks had offered tools of reason, inquiry, and aesthetic appreciation, and the Buddhist teachings provided the guiding light, the direct insight into the mind's nature and the impermanence of all things. Together, these influences formed a harmonious practice, a path toward inner peace that was both universal and timeless. A messenger arrived one evening with news from time flowed like the river, and Aniruddha's hair had grown silver. Yet his eyes retained the clarity that had drawn travelers from distant lands. The monastery stood resilient, a living testament to the merging of cultures, the dialogues of centuries, and the practice of wisdom that had transcended borders. Aniruddha often reflected on the unlikely convergence of Persian, Greek, and Indian thought, realizing that the threads of each culture had woven together to create a tapestry of profound insight. One morning, as the sun painted the mountains in gold, a young student approached Aniruddha with a question he had long pondered. "Master," the student said, "how can we ensure that these teachings endure, that the wisdom of many lands is not lost to time?" Aniruddha smiled, placing his hand over the flowing river. "The teachings endure because they are not locked in scrolls or statues alone," he said. "They live in practice, in dialogue, and in the heart of each being who strives to understand. Greek reason, Persian ethics, and Buddhist mindfulness are like tributaries. They nourish the river of wisdom, but the river flows onward through every mind that receives it." That day, visitors arrived from Persia, bearing tales of new cities where justice and ethics were guided by the principles they had learned in Gandhara. Greek scholars brought scrolls describing the study of nature and reason, inspired by the dialogue between their ancestors and the monks of the monastery. And local students shared their meditative practices with travelers, creating a bridge between East and West, past and present. Aniruddha led his students to the main courtyard, where sculptures of the Buddha, carved in Greek style with flowing robes and serene expressions, stood beside intricate Persian designs etched into stone. "Observe," he said, "how beauty and insight can coexist, each enhancing the other. So too must we cultivate wisdom, embracing multiple perspectives while remaining rooted in the principles of compassion and mindfulness." As night fell, the monastery glowed with lamps, and the river reflected the stars above. Aniruddha sat quietly, listening to the soft murmur of students reciting chants and travelers exchanging stories. He saw in this harmony the fulfillment of decades of learning and teaching, the realization that inner peace was not an isolated pursuit, but a living practice nurtured by openness, understanding, and the blending of cultures. In his final reflections, Aniruddha wrote, "The seeds of wisdom are ancient, stretching across lands, generations, and civilizations. Greek thought has taught discernment, Persian tradition has taught ethical responsibility, and Buddhist mindfulness has taught clarity of heart. Together, they form a path toward inner peace that transcends borders and time. May those who come after us walk this path with awareness, compassion, and courage." As the years passed, Aniruddha's presence gradually faded, but his teachings remained, carried forward by the students he had nurtured and the travelers who had journeyed to Gandhara. The monastery continued to flourish, a beacon of intercultural understanding where art, philosophy, and meditation coexisted in harmony. Pilgrims and scholars came from afar, drawn by the stories of the monk who